Welcome to GASP.
That's Growing and Aging Sex Positive.
Get ready to grow with us as we discuss all things sex and sexuality related.
I'm Nina.
And I'm Cari.
Today we'll be discussing pornography in relationships. Is making pornography based on exploitative relationships? How does porn affect couples? What does it mean to say that pornography is addictive?
And folks, we want to hear from you. What's on your mind? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gasppod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com. We want to thank our sponsor, Oak Park Our Whole Lives. Oak Park OWL has classes for kids in 1st, 5th, and 8th grade in the Greater West Side of Chicagoland area. Classes start in September and January each year. For more information, please go to their website at www.opowl.org.
Now let's get into it. Hi, folks. Today we are talking about pornography again from another lens.
A pattern for us. We're on porn part 3 now.
We are. But there are so many angles to this, and it just really isn't talked about as much as it needs to be. So today we're talking about pornography and relationships, different kinds of relationships.
Yeah.
And we're going to start out with pornography and the relationships between creators of porn and also between the consumers and the creators.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's an important place to explore.
And great. It's a big question lots of people have about pornography. It's a concern that I had without much knowledge or awareness of the details about how it actually happens in the world.
Yeah.
So I've been learning a lot, and I'm looking forward to talking about that with you.
Yeah, me too.
So we worry, or you might be worried, I have been worried in the past about pornography and exploitation.
Yeah.
I'm concerned especially about ways in which it might be created, the people who are involved in creating the pornography, and ways in which they might be exploited.
So specifically like the performers, if you're watching like video content, the performers on screen.
Yes.
And anyone involved in the sex work pornography industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it makes sense for that to the exploitation to be a concern there because it's a place where there's vulnerable people.
It's hard to do that kind of work.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, so with vulnerability comes risk.
Yeah.
And there are different ways in which that could play out, right?
For sure.
There's could be the porn star setup where someone is intentionally agreeing in some way, but in some sort of coercive or their coercive conditions or their ability to make choices is compromised in some way.
Yeah. And I think for me, when I hear you say that, what coercion in any sexual encounter, like regardless of whether it's somebody who's a sex worker or performing or in an interpersonal relationship, like coercion is not acceptable to be part of a sexual contact or episode, right? That's just bad. I don't want that for anyone. But I think what makes it hard with pornography and specifically internet pornography is I, as the consumer, am not privy to any of the things leading up to that sexual encounter. So I actually don't know. It's hard to, it's performative and it's entertainment. So it feels even harder to know if there was coercion and exploitation. Like, how would I know to watch it?
And in some ways, any actor is in some ways setting aside their maybe true selves or putting on a show, putting on a mask, so that honesty can be really hard to, or impossible to know. There could be economic pressures, right? There might be pressures from other relationships. Let's see, that's a concern, right? Then there would be other cases of exploitation where maybe someone is either not able to consent for other reasons, like they're too young.
Yeah.
If someone's under the age of consent or not able to consent, that's like its own problem.
Yeah.
And then there's also revenge porn.
Yeah.
Where
we should define that for listeners.
Where a video is made with the understanding that it was for private use, and then, or other imagery was made for private use, and then it is shared unilaterally by one of those parties without consultation.
And I believe revenge porn is illegal.
Yes.
In all 50 states. Just to float out there, it's not a valid or consensual category of media in any way. Revenge porn is illegal, and also I will go on record and say morally unacceptable to me.
Maybe that is even a level beyond exploitation. I don't know if we want to level these things in that way.
It's hard.
But it's non-consensual in a particular way.
And I guess I go back to, in my mind, what makes that challenging is that I, as a viewer of that content, may not be privy to the fact that it is, in fact, revenge porn, right? Like, if I was able to say this person didn't consent to having this video on the internet, then that's like a no-brainer. But we don't have that information. It's very hard to get to that truth.
It's impossible in some ways.
Yeah.
So one consideration that I find really exciting with this concern about exploitation in the background is these developments of pornography that assuage some of my concerns, like they develop the interest in animated pornography, for example, right? That's one of we saw in the Pornhub report that is
that hentai category
really popular.
So popular.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that relating to exploitation, but that's good.
No performers had to take their clothes off in the making of this episode.
Yeah. There's one other form of sort of exploitation that you didn't hit on that I think about, and maybe you're going to get to it later, and maybe you'll say, hey, Cari, I don't think this is related, but comes up for me, is this idea that in an in-person sexual encounter, consent would be like ongoing, and you'd be consenting to the behavior, and then that it's over, right? When you introduce videography or photography and then the internet, there is no opportunity for that person to revoke consent in the future. So that's something that I really worry about, because I know that 18 is the legal age that someone could legally, above board, decide to perform in pornography. And I don't begrudge anyone that. Like, I think that's fine if that's a choice. Like, I don't have any level of like judgment on the performer, but I think about myself at 18, and I think about how society views pornography and particularly what society says and does to women that choose to engage in sex work. And I worry about the young person who says, this is my life path, and then loses all copyright of those images, right? Somebody else owns all this explicit material, and you don't get like an opt-out in 10 years when you're like, you know what, I've actually decided to take a different path. Can you take that down? Like, it's once it's done, you've consented to it being out in the world.
Just the nature of the internet, you mean? Because it now exists out there on people's
You can never
home computers. And
you can never revoke consent.
Right.
And I don't know that's whether or not that's exploitative is up for debate, but I don't think it's unreasonable to have a concern that a future person might say, I actually don't want this content out anymore.
I can see that being an issue for many areas of life too, right? Where maybe a journalist writes an article that they come to regret 10 years later. But it's out there. It's
not unique to pornography. I just think it's the way society handles pornography. And I pretty regularly think, I'm so grateful that like social media wasn't a thing when I was a young person, because I think the same applies. You make all kinds of choices when you're a young person. But when I was a young person, you couldn't like easily upload a video in real time and then have it be online forever. So yeah. So maybe that's a separate topic, but I do worry about it.
So as a responsible user of pornography, one might want one's viewing habits to be consistent with one's values, right? And exploitation would be one of those concerns. There are definitely extreme cases that we've seen, that we can see in the media. A parent company of Pornhub not too long ago admitted to receiving proceeds of sex trafficking in court and agreed to be monitored for 3 years. That was December 2023.
Yeah. Pretty recently.
Yeah. And this was a result of a number of cases of pornography being made in sex trafficking contexts, so definitely non-consensually created. And of course, then the underage concern is its own thing, and Pornhub has knowingly profited from videos of 13-year-olds. So really, from the standpoint of this like particular very large company in the field, one of the biggest creators of porn in the field, some big concerns there. One way to maybe mitigate this that is out there is to use resources other than Pornhub.
Yeah.
So OnlyFans being a popular one. Do you want to tell us about what that model is?
Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about OnlyFans, except that as a platform, it allows content creators to decide what is freely searchable and available, and then they can hide the bulk or all of their content behind a paywall. So I'm not suggesting that exploitation does not happen on OnlyFans or that it's like void of any like ethical issues. But a person can, for example, not post any sexually explicit content for free. So you can search the person up and find pornography, but you could pay a monthly subscription fee to have access to their porn content, or you could buy pay-per-view items or engage in kind of other sexual contact. I think people do chats. I think there's a whole host of services that you can sell on OnlyFans.
Right.
And I'm not saying that I think that negates the like ethical quandaries of just like the sex work industry in general, but I do think there's at least a slight barrier to entry that we hope would reduce revenge porn being uploaded to Reddit without the participants' permission or any of... I think there's probably... if I'm being really honest and searching my heart, I think there probably is still exploitative content of people who are sex trafficked and human trafficked, because I think that's such a huge problem in our society. But at least the creators have to provide identification to a parent company, and it's not an anonymously uploaded video to Pornhub.
I really like how it seems that creators have so much more control over the content. Maybe they get to keep a larger share of the profits and have control over those who are subscribing to their channel or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that they can ban people who maybe are being rude, for example.
Yeah. I definitely think I've understood that there's more controls there. And I also think I don't necessarily 100% have the articulation for this, but just like anecdotally, what I've understood is that I think as you create like a slightly more like human connection from the like performer and the consumer, it actually broadens the like body types, sexual preferences, like scenarios, and the types of content. I think it actually broadens that because it's like there's something for everyone, and so I think there's a leveling of the playing field. And I'm not trying to like gloss over the fact that there are definitely still stereotypical, very processed, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fake-boobed porn stars on OnlyFans, but there's also a whole host of other types of sex workers. It's like whatever's going to sell. People have platforms with whatever type of content they choose to sell.
It's really exciting that it might not be restricted to just a few big studios who are controlling all the money and all the creation.
Yeah. And
The more dispersed creation seems to offer a lot more room for creativity and for control.
Yeah, and definitely it's going to bring the consumer and client closer to the creator. So it's, that there's a market for that. There's something human and connected about that to me, right? Which in my mind is the ideal state of sex work, right? That it's still human, connected, and consensual. Not some creepy parent company profiting off of sex trafficking rings.
So definitely a lot of questions there we want to be cautious about. Doesn't necessarily negate the whole field of pornography. So
and I think there's probably problematic content across many platforms. And I don't have a singular answer to fix all of that.
About pornography specifically, or do you just mean life now?
Well, life specific. I was thinking about pornography specifically, but no, I can't fix all the ills of the world either. If I could. I think it's not dramatic to say I don't support human trafficking or sex trafficking of any kind, and I'm appalled that it's such a huge problem socially.
Yeah.
I don't know how to fix it. I wish I did, but I don't.
Moving on, we also want to talk about pornography in personal relationships, in coupled romantic relationships. Pornography can be used in a couple relationship for individual pleasure, of course, and also is used by couples who watch pornography together as part of their sexual fun time.
For sure.
Yeah, and there has actually been an increase in use of pornography in that way as couples using it together.
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah. But also there are these worries around this, right, that you see coming up pretty often.
Yeah.
Where it seems to really bring up a lot of concerns about, is this a problem for the relationship in some way? One way to think about that, or that some people think about it, is that it's a form of cheating.
Yeah.
Using pornography while you're in a coupled relationship is a form of cheating, according to some. And I find this really confusing.
Yeah.
And interesting as to pull out what are the deeper motivations or assumptions or beliefs behind a statement like, it's cheating for my partner to use porn.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear how you feel about this, because I have like a big kind of complicated reaction to that myself.
Yeah, good. Trying to pull this out or pull out different threads, we can imagine that there might be an element of deception.
Yeah. Like you don't know what your partner's doing, or they've lied to you about it, or the type of porn they're viewing is shocking. Is that kind of what yeah.
And that might be someone might feel like they have been deceived even if there was no actual denial, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those aspects of an intimate relationship where two different people enter a relationship necessarily with different assumptions about what is appropriate in a relationship, because they are two different individuals. Yeah. And these clashes come up from time to time in any partnered relationship where you have different assumptions. So if one partner might assume that there will be no pornography consumption while in the relationship, and the other partner might or might not also share that assumption.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, like, in all of our episodes where we've talked about pornography, it is such a stigmatized and taboo subject. And even within the research, I think you see that varying levels of assumptions about everybody watches porn and it's totally normal. And then most people watch porn. But I can imagine if you're a person that doesn't consume any pornography, that's your normal, right? If that's what feels normal to you, I don't know that you would have anything to compare against until you were in a relationship.
Right. We don't necessarily talk about our porn consumption in our general, it's not water cooler conversation.
No, and in fact, you'd probably lie. I would lie about it.
There you go.
I'm defo not talking to my neighbor about it or being really transparent. That would be a huge, weird, icky conversation.
So there might be a sense of being lied to which might be rooted in miscommunication or it might be an actual lie. Either one of those scenarios could come up. Because if you start out a relationship or if you agree at some point in a relationship, hey, there will be no porn consumption while we're in a relationship, and then you find out there is, then that's a straightforward case of lying.
Yeah.
So that would be one option, one explanation. There's a lot that gets built into that because we also, in relationships, when we look at like marriage counseling or couples counseling, one of the big issues that comes up is mismatched libidos or different levels of desire. Again, two individuals, right, with two whole lives, two whole sexual lives that are coming together in some kind of partnership. And there are a lot of assumptions and lots of baggage and lots of ideas about our sex drives.
Yeah, and again, like as a human on this planet, I have only had my human experience. Whatever my libido is and my desires are and my preferences feel like I definitely can relate to entering all types of relationships of, yeah, this is generally how people do things. You must be the same as me. And that sounds like that's not what you've heard from sex therapists about couples.
That you're describing that really well, that we enter relationships with these assumptions that the other person is like me in ways that I don't have to question, right? And that's just part of being a person, is that we go out into the world and meet other people, and often our default is, you are like me.
Mm-hmm.
But if we have mismatched levels of desire or mismatched libidos, which more likely than not, right, then one way in which that can be healthily expressed is with porn consumption.
Yeah. Meaning it can be acceptable for a person to use porn in solo sex or masturbation to meet their own sexual needs. That feels like an acceptable way to resolve that relational issue of a mismatched libido.
Yes. And this is really important because I think some people seem to be bringing this idea, maybe especially in heterosexual relationships, this idea in that we should fully satisfy each other.
Say more about that.
If my relationship is going well, then that means that I can be everything sexually that my partner needs.
Yeah.
And if my partner needs additional sexual stimulation, then that somehow reflects back on me, or it reflects back on our partnership. And I think that this is an assumption that comes up a lot in romantic relationships. There's a sense of, I want to be everything that you need. And there's something beautiful and romantic about that. But it's also, I think, really unrealistic.
Yeah.
In a relationship where you are grappling, or where you're actually partnering with another actual individual full human being.
Yeah, and I have this sort of like deep complicated feelings about some of the ways that people express and practice monogamy, specifically around that, and not even related to pornography. So when I said I have like a big reaction and complicated feelings about this, I definitely feel that it is a trap for people socially, that they've been pitched, especially heterosexual couples, this idea that you're failing if you don't do monogamy right. And often monogamy means your partner never desires anything but you. And sometimes it's extreme. It gets expressed socially. Pornography, I think we tend to hear people talking about, I want to set a boundary with my partner, and it's not acceptable to me for my partner to watch porn, and things like that is one way it gets expressed. But I also hear people expressing it about things like liking an Instagram post, like with a woman in a bikini. That's like unacceptable. And it's like always reflected back on the like insecure partner, like they've done something wrong or failed at their relationship.
So it might also say something about how I'm not attractive enough.
Yeah.
if my partner also views other people as attractive.
Yeah, and it definitely is sometimes pitched. I don't know if you've seen these posts like on social media, and I am a woman, so I see and interact with women who are dating men or with men, and it's often wrapped up in this complicated, if you're not satisfying him, he's going to be looking elsewhere, ladies. That kind of very complicated social messaging to women about controlling their partner's behavior. And that feels so complicated.
Or vulnerability, too. Like there's a thread in there of he will leave you if you aren't satisfying
Yeah.
him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of other fears that might get tapped unless you are able to talk that out and disentangle those fears. It could be really hard.
Yeah, I think I hear that from people all over. So what do we think about partners and pornography in a monogamous relationship?
I don't know, Cari.
For anyone listening, Nida is looking at me like, what?
You're not allowed to ask me that question.
I have fierce feelings about people having a right to preserve like their solo sexuality. And so I think often feel I don't love policing a partner's behavior. And I think when I read a post about, I just don't accept that in a relationship, I have this sort of like knee-jerk reaction that it's almost as weird to me as saying my partner's not allowed to masturbate. I'm like, first of all, how do you know? Second of all, like, why does that involve you? So I think I have a feeling of, I think couples should talk about it. And then I also feel like preserving solo sexual identity is totally acceptable, even in monogamy. And I guess I hope and wish for people that they know that they don't have to share every part of their sexuality with every person. Like, even if you're in a monogamous relationship, you don't owe like every fantasy, every sexual thought, every sexual behavior to that person. So that's why I'm asking your opinion, is because I keep seeing these posts on social media and this rhetoric from society. And I really am like, ugh, no. Like I rebel against it.
Yeah, I don't have the strong feelings that you have, but I do like your point that it's important to maintain sexual autonomy in some way, even if you're in a partnered relationship. Your relationship with your body is still your own, and you have that right.
Yeah,
I get that.
And I'll go on record and say I don't think that it's acceptable to lie to your partner. I'm not a fan of lying and deception, so that feels like a super clear line to me. Yeah.
But there can be an experience or sense of deception even if there isn't an outright lie happening.
Yeah, for sure.
Even if it's rooted in miscommunication.
For sure.
So one decision point I think that is interesting with respect to cheating. I'm not going to identify my own opinions about this because I don't know. I am interested in exploring these ideas without coming to any conclusions. That's what a podcast is for.
I hear you, but I'm full of opinions, Nina.
So one way to think about it is, does pornography use represent a way to access internal fantasies?
Ooh.
So our relationships with our own sexualities, or does it represent to somebody sexual engagement with someone else?
Are you asking me, or do you have thoughts? Because I find that fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm just trying to identify two ways of thinking about pornography use that might result in very different responses to the question about is pornography use cheating in a romantic relationship. So if pornography use is something like a kind of sexual engagement with another person, then in a monogamous two-person romantic relationship, then that is a form that seems like part of the definition of cheating, right? Then you're engaging in some kind of sexual encounter with another person in some way.
Yeah, I'm honoring what you said, and I think probably listeners can tell by now if they've made it to this episode with us that Nina does a much better job of exploration than I do. I am filled with feelings and opinions to the brim all the time.
Yeah.
And so I hear that, and I go to other types of media, and I'm like, if I thought that going to the movie was me engaging with Timothy Chalamet on a personal level, you would tell me I was mentally ill. So I think that's another part of why I struggle with the porn is cheating conversation, because I'm like, it feels very one way.
Yeah.
Really, it feels very much like a one-way thing. And if you are in a place where you're feeling like you're in a relationship or like feeling like it's deeper, that might not be about the porn.
We were just talking. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, push back.
Definitely, there's like the Jason Momoa thing, or people have their lists of who they're allowed to cheat on.
Okay, but can I just say Timothy Chalamet is not on my list. Okay.
Jason Momoa is not on mine.
Okay, it's just the only person I can think of. That's not my hall pass night,
right? But we were just talking about OnlyFans.
Yeah.
And ways in which pornographic content can represent a kind of relationship that can get built between the performer and the user.
So, like, for me, this is my personal opinion, like my personal boundaries. I think consuming media is one way. The media has been made, and then you're watching it. The only way you're participating is as a viewer. Mm-hmm. If you're chatting with someone, asking for custom videos, sending messages about your day, even if they're not sexual, that for me feels like a very like hard boundary that it's cheating, right? Like that feels, unless you've discussed it in your relationship and it's been okayed by your partner, that feels super like cheating.
Yeah. Not what we typically understand the boundaries of monogamy to include.
Yeah. Whether you're paying for that interaction or not, it's still like an interaction. Yeah. And an interaction with another person. So.
Oh, and then payment could be another boundary that someone might set up. Whether if you're sharing finances, you might not want your money to go that way.
Yeah, I think for me that's a grayer area, but I think it would really irk me if my joint funds were in a committed relationship were being spent on sexual or pornographic content that like I didn't know about. That would feel like a deception. Yeah.
That's going to, depend a lot on that particular couple's understanding of their finances.
Yeah.
So we need to keep going. What about addiction? So this is something that comes up. We see that talked about with respect to partners as well as individuals concerned about their own pornography use. And this word comes up a lot, porn as an addiction. And you and I have different kind of takes on that. I thought that was interesting too. Can you tell us what is your reaction to the term, Cari?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of terms like porn addiction or even really sex addiction. And by not a fan, I don't think that they accurately describe what's happening for the person. I have personal history with people who struggle with substance abuse, who are like physiologically addicted to a substance that they ingest. And you can't reach that point with pornography or sexual behavior where you're going to die and have withdrawal without it. There isn't that same component. And so for me, it feels like those items should be kept separate. I also think it's problematic because of the social messaging around sexuality and the fact that there isn't like some amount of sex or viewing of porn that's, quote, normal and some that's abnormal. I don't love the word addiction in relation to this. And I also think we just touched on seeing social media posts and people being concerned about their spouse or partner viewing porn. And that almost always devolves very quickly on these advice posts to, he's addicted to porn. And I'm like, what information do you have to support such an extreme claim? But I will say that I think that if the amount, the quantity, the type of, or anything about your viewing of pornography feels compulsive, harmful, is like destroying relationships, like you for sure deserve help with that. I don't love the word addiction for it.
Yeah, there's no question that it's possible to use pornography in a way that is problematic in your life, that you consider problematic, right? And that is what is important to consider. And definitely there's help available of many kinds. I also don't love the word addiction because to me it seems to convey some unhelpful implications, right? That somebody is helpless, that they're stuck, they can't change. They might, if that language is helpful to you, then fine, right? If that is how it helps you to maybe get help, then that's all good. But I can also imagine understanding oneself as being addicted to porn could contribute to entrenching someone into feeling even more stuck, even more like this is unchangeable. So then if that's the case, then maybe find another way to think about it. I think that it's interesting and worth noting here that the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, they have a statement on pornography addiction, which is essentially that they do not consider addiction to be the appropriate description. And the reason for that, the main reason is that there are so many different kinds of values involved that what counts as problematic use is going to be heavily influenced by your values.
Right.
So there's not going to be some kind of objective standard to say this amount is problematic and that amount is not.
Yep. That tracks. I'm glad we're at least in alignment with AASECT.
Yeah, and there's a link to that in the show notes, by the way. So we have talked about, let's see, the relationship of porn in society with respect to exploitation and the relationship between consumers and performers. We've talked about pornography in romantic relationships and some of the complications there. And then with porn and addiction, we've been talking about the relationship between pornography and oneself, right? One's own sexuality. One relationship we haven't talked about yet is parenting.
Yeah.
A really important one. Yeah.
And maybe why people came to this podcast too.
Finally, at long last, right?
Yeah, 3 episodes in.
Yeah. And there is some good work here from Common Sense Media. There's a fairly recent survey of teenagers 13 to 17 that was done in 2023, and there's a link to that in the show notes as well. What we're seeing is that pornography, it's on the internet, right?
Yeah.
It is everywhere, and that includes in front of our kids' eyeballs.
Yeah. Did we want to share a stat on the prevalence?
The average age of first viewing pornography is 12.
Yeah.
And that is really startling to a lot of parents. At 12 years old, a lot of kids, they still look really young.
Yeah.
They are really young. They might be in 5th grade still. Or maybe not 5th grade, but 5th or 6th grade. They've got a lot of growing up to do.
Yeah, they're still preteens.
And I'll say 15% said that they first saw online pornography at age 10 or younger.
Yeah, which is really young.
Really young. That's really tough to deal with. We want to be clear that we do not consider pornography to be appropriate for kids. We define it in our sex education program as entertainment for adults.
Yeah.
And that it is not educational. It is important for us to address it. And we do encourage parents to address it with your kids as well, because they likely have seen something.
Yeah.
It may have been intentional. It may not have been intentional. So 58% of respondents in the survey saw pornography accidentally.
Yeah.
So maybe they were looking for something else and it just showed up on their screen. Maybe a friend said, hey, look at this. This is weird. And they saw it that way. There are multiple ways in which kids might come across pornography, but it's everywhere and it happens. That's the world we're living in. It is not appropriate for kids, partly because it is not educational.
Right.
And for kids, when just developmentally, what they see is going to become part of their education, right? That the difference between education and entertainment is something that requires maturity. It requires personal development and education, frankly, too.
Yeah. And so what I'm getting out of what you're saying is that we as parents and as sex educators advising parents need to have conversations with our kids openly and maybe younger than we want to and think we should about the fact that porn exists and what our values about pornography are, and that we'd like them to wait until they're an adult to view it. But then the other thing about what you said that I think is important for any parents listening is that although it's not something that we want young people to seek out and engage with, there's also a reality that porn is readily accessible everywhere, and we don't want a shame factor around it because that's not beneficial for kids either.
Absolutely,
we want them to be able to talk to us about this stuff. And so not saying anything or shrouding it with mystery and shame won't stop the kid from accidentally viewing porn, but it will shut down conversations where you could potentially help them to not have harmful experiences.
That's really important. And just to connect the dots, right? You can imagine a kid coming across pornography accidentally, experiencing some kind of arousal around that, and then also feeling shame in response to that arousal. Like, there's something wrong with me seeing this. I'm having weird feelings and I don't know what to do about it. Like, that could all happen in the space of a few seconds. And what we are really committed to, as Cari was saying, is, right, sending a message. We do not want our kids to get a message that connects arousal and shame.
Yeah, it's not pleasurable. It doesn't benefit their sexual development. It's actually, to me, like when I think about it holistically, as both an educator and a parent, the shame seems more harmful than just the pornography. Unfortunately, there's sexual messages all over the world that do influence our sexual development, right? That just is. And we just don't want it to then be coupled with, oh my God, what did I see? I'm bad. It's just not a great scenario.
That's a really great point. And that kind of comes back to our first episode on pornography, where we explored the idea that pornography can be much wider than the kind of restricted content that we usually think of when we're talking about pornography. That can include the Instagram posts with the bikinis, or the Victoria's Secret catalog, or a commercial for hamburgers even. And kids see all of that all the time and have physical responses to it, might have arousal, might also have curiosity or confusion or discomfort around it.
Yeah.
And it's parents' job to reassure your kids that there's nothing wrong with you. It's the world that's pretty screwed up when it comes to stuff like that. Many kids, by the way, do take pornography to be educational or representative of actual sex. Unless you say this out loud to your kids, that's going to be the assumption. From the Common Sense Media Report, 45% of kids felt that online pornography gives helpful information about sex.
That is a shocking statistic.
Yes, and it really underscores how if you don't say anything, your kids will still learn things. They're just going to learn things that you wish they weren't learning. Yeah.
And it's such a valid, I can easily put myself in a young person's like mindset on this, because it's such a valid question. I think like a lot of times And I'm currently teaching one of the 5th grade classes in sex ed, and it's difficult when kids are not developmentally maybe ready to understand what physical acts are involved in sex, not because it's like a secret, but because they're not there yet. And they have all these really genuine questions about how things happen. And the last thing that you wish for a young person is that they get that answer via pornography on the internet, because it's like not real. Like it is real, but it's not made for education. But I really do understand the impulse to want some visual input to figure out what's going where and what people do, because it's mysterious and how does it work and how do you find out how it works? And it's so valid. And porn is so not made to be helpful in those ways, right? It's just not what it's made for.
What's that joke that if porn were realistic, then plumbers would show up to my house a lot sooner than they do?
It's just like all the scenarios are ridiculous and absurd, and the fantasy's fine for adults, but like probably not what you want your 12-year-old to take away sex is, right? It's funny.
Nobody shows up your door and just takes off their clothes. No. That's not.
They don't.
That's not how it happens.
Never once had a plumber offer to service me that way. Never once.
Never once.
It's never been a good time when a plumber shows up. They've never led to great sex. Or, I want to be clear, any sex. Yeah.
So there's a lot of misinformation out there.
So much misinformation.
Yeah. And unless we say to them, hey, that is not real, then of course they're going to assume it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to your kids. Try to sit with the discomfort, own it, have a conversation with them about it.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Cari.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks for spending time with us today. Don't forget, we would like to hear from you. What do you think of today's episode? What questions or thoughts do you have about sex and sexuality? We will share some questions and replies in a future episode. Write to us at gasppod@gmail.com. That's GASPPOD@gmail.com.
GASP is a joint venture between Dancing Elm Consulting and Cari Hypes.
That's right. And also thank you to Motion Post Inc. for editing, and to the Oak Park Public Library for providing the audio booth.
Thanks also to our sponsor, Oak Park Our Whole Lives. Oak Park OWL delivers comprehensive, inclusive sexuality education to youth and families in the greater west side of the Chicagoland area. For more information, check out their website at www.opowl.org.
Take care of yourself and others. Talk to you soon.